In this video, I'd like to talk about a very useful tool within GNS3. It's an optional tool, but it, like I said, can be very useful to you, called the Snapshot tool. So first of all, let me paint you a picture. Let's start with a basic GNS3 topology, such as this one. I'll zoom in on this here. So let's say my objective here is to practice EIGRP, maybe by itself, then practice OSPF by itself, and then maybe practice the redistribution of EIGRP into OSPF, and just basically use this simple topology here and make multiple permutations to it, change it multiple times. And here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that maybe once I start out, maybe I just want to start with the simple topology of just IP addresses and that's it. And then later on, add on EIGRP to that. But at some point in time, I might want to go back to that initial topology where everything was connected and all it had was IP addresses. Go back to the time before it had any routing protocols configured. And also, maybe after I initially create EIGRP and I have that running, maybe in the future, I want to go back to that. Maybe in the future, after I've got OSPF and EIGRP redistribution working just fine, I say to myself, okay, I'd like to go back to the time when I didn't have OSPF, when I had all my IP addresses, when I had EIGRP working, but before I had all my OSPF. In other words, I want to have the ability to go back and forth in time between different topologies to be able to play around with adding things, changing things, and that is what snapshots are used for. Where within a project, you want to be able to go back and forth in time between what that project looked like at various states in time. Now, one of the things you might be wondering, because this was a question that came up with me, was, well, why don't I just create multiple projects? In other words, why don't I have one project that is simply this topology with nothing but the IP addresses in it? And then, why don't I create another project that has this topology with the IP addresses and EIGRP in it? And then maybe a third project that has this EIGRP and OSPF running. And then if I want to just go back and forth, I'll just open up different project files to do that. Why would I use this snapshot tool instead of just using multiple projects? Well, here's the reason why. Basically, at a high level, it comes down to memory consumption. That's what it boils down to. For example, look here in my folder where my projects are located. My users, my name, GNS3, and projects. And you can see right now I've just got 4 projects in here. Well, if I click on one, just select it, and then I right click and hit properties, notice that one project, 524 megabytes of memory for that. Okay, what about the next project? Right click, properties. Once again, 532 megabytes of memory. So this is the downside of using, or I should say creating multiple projects if all you want to do is go back and forward with the same topology but adding different stuff to that topology or changing the topology. It's going to eat up tons of memory in your laptop or PC if the way you're doing that is by creating multiple projects. This is where the snapshot tool is really beneficial because everything within the snapshot stays within this one project. As an example, so let me go ahead and close this right here. So in this particular topology, I have so far created 2 snapshots. The first snapshot was just IP addressing and that was it. All the links are up, IP addressing was configured, nothing else was configured. So let's go back to that one. So, and then I'll show you how to actually create new snapshots. So the first thing I'm going to show you is if you've already got a snapshot running, how do you go back to it? In other words, if you've created a snapshot in the past, how do you revert back to that snapshot? So let's say that right now, this topology actually was running EIGRP, it actually was running OSPF, there's all sorts of authentication and other fun stuff in here, and I say, okay, I'm done with that. Now I want to go back to my real primitive topology that all it had on it was IP addressing and that's it. So step number 1, and this is the critical thing, when using the snapshot tool to either create a new snapshot or to restore back to what a previous snapshot looked like, main thing to remember, all of your devices, all of your routers and Ethernet switches have to be turned off. So anything that's running Cisco iOS, don't worry about the built-in nodes like cloud and host and all that stuff, but anything that's running iOS, your Ether switch modules and your routers has to be in the off state. If you try to create a new project while routers are currently running, or if you try to revert back to an old project while stuff is currently running, you're going to have unpredictable results. A lot of times what I've seen is that it just doesn't work. It takes you right back to the same place where you were before you went into Snapshots. So make sure that all of your iOS devices are turned off before using Snapshot in any way, shape, or form. So now I want to revert back to an old Snapshot. So number one, stop all my devices. Now that they're all stopped, go up to this tool right here. This is the, as you can see, Manage Snapshots tool. And you're going to want to click on that. And you can see in this particular project, I've already created 2 snapshots. So I'm going to click on the one, and you can see when you create a snapshot, you're going to want to give it some sort of descriptive name so you can remember what your topology was like, what it was doing at that point in time. So I'm going to click on IP addressing only, and I'm going to click on Restore. And it warns you. It says, okay, if you do this, anything that's currently in your running config that hasn't been saved is going to be gone. It's going to be wiped out. I say, yeah, okay, well that's actually what I want to do. I want to wipe out the current state and revert back to the previous state. Okay, so here I am. Now actually probably what I should have done is when I first started this, I probably shouldn't have labeled in like EIGRP and OSPF. When I created the snapshot, it probably would have made more sense just to have the actual picture look like the routers, the links, and the IP addresses. Because right now, looking at this, I know it kind of looks confusing, like, well, wait a second, is he still running EIGRP and OSPF? No, I'm not, and here's how I can show you. I'll go ahead and start everything up. All right, now it's running. Now I'm just going to get into one of my devices. Let's say R2. And the way I know that the snapshot worked, the way that I reverted back, is that when this device comes up, if I do show IP interface brief, actually let me go ahead and just make the font size a little bit larger for you guys so you can read a little bit easier on the video. There we go. Show IP interface brief. So you can see right now my IP addresses are there. It remembered that at the time I took this snapshot, those interfaces were actually up and connected. And if I do show IP protocols, you can see there's nothing. So right now, this is before I configured any routing protocol at all. All I had were IP addresses. Now let's go ahead and close this window. And now I say, okay, well, what I'd like to do now is move forward in time. I want to go forward in time to when I created the snapshot when my EIGRP was up and functional. Okay, click stop. Stop everything. Go to the snapshot button again. Select the snapshot that you previously created and restore. Once again, you get the warning. All right, everything should be back, so now let's start everything up again. So how do I know that that worked? How do I know that it restored me back to that point in time when not only the IP addresses were here, but I had also configured EIGRP? Well, once again, let's just double click on a router, R2 here. Show IP interface brief, verify that my IP addresses are still there, yep. And now show IP protocols. And you can see, I've got EIGRP running. Show IP EIGRP neighbor. I have an EIGRP neighbor. So it now brought me to that point in time. So now let's take it one step further. Let me show you how to create a brand new snapshot. So in order to do this, I'm going to take up with my existing topology, and now I'm going to configure just a basic OSPF adjacency between R2 and R3. So let's bring up R3 here. All right, so let's start with R2, router OSPF1, network, and in this particular case, it's going to be the 2.3.2 network. And that's going to be in area 0. And that's all I'm going to do. I'm not going to do any redistribution right now. I'm just going to get my EIGRP up and working. Now notice one thing I did which is just very, very important. I'll zoom in on this. In this particular case, I issued the write memory command. It's kind of abbreviated here, but I could also have issued the copy run start command. Why is that important? Because when you take the snapshot, when you create it, at that moment in time, it takes a snapshot of the current saved configuration, the startup configuration of your devices. It does not take a snapshot of your running configuration. So if you have a running configuration with any unsaved changes, they will not be a part of your snapshot. So make sure you save all your configs with copy run start or write memory, whichever you prefer. Then make sure you shut down all your routers, power them off, and then take the snapshot. All right, so I saved my configuration here, so now let's go into, I'm done with router 2. Let's go into the other router. And actually, before I do this, I will just copy that part of my OSPF configuration so I can just copy and paste it. Make life easy for myself. All right, now let's get into the other router. Paste all that stuff in. It didn't work. Okay, so let's go back over here. There we go. So we should see now OSPF takes a little bit longer than EIGRP to do its stuff, but there we go. Now the OSPF adjacency is up. Show IP OSPF neighbor. Great. Now I have to remember to save the configuration in this guy. All right, so I've saved the configuration in both routers. I will shut this terminal application down. I will turn off my routers. And now once again, I'll go to the snapshot tool, and this time I'll select create. And I'll give it a name, OSPF EIGRP no redistribute. That's just my name. It saves it, and I close it. Now, where does it actually save these snapshots? You might be wondering, are these snapshots going to be good even after I close this project and completely walk away? What if I close my laptop? Are the snapshots still in there? Yes, they are, and here's how we can see. So everything's closed. Let's go ahead and quit from GNS3. And now I'll go into my file where all of my GNS3 stuff is. Here's projects. So I'll select that snapshot test. That's the one I was doing. And under project files, you can see right there, it has a category called snapshots. And if I double click on that, there are all the snapshots that I created. So now let's go ahead and notice if I go back to the project file, that's all contained within that one project. So that one project now that has multiple snapshots in time, it exceeded the size a little bit. You know, the other projects were like 500 and something megs. Now in this particular case, we're up to 799 megabits, but still, that's a lot less memory than if I had created 3 or 4 separate projects rather than 3 or 4 snapshots. So, okay. So let's go back to GNS3 and start it up again. I will open that project. Now by default, when you open the project, GNS3 will open it to the most recent snapshot that you took. So right now it should have opened it to my EIGRP OSPF snapshot, because that was the very last one that I took before I shut everything down. Let's confirm that. So I'll just open up R2, and if I'm right, R2 should now be running EIGRP and OSPF. And here's how we can tell. Show IP EIGRP neighbor. Yep, I have an EIGRP neighbor. Show IP OSPF neighbor. And there's my OSPF neighbor. I say, okay, well, I want to go back in time when all I had were IP addresses. Maybe I want to get rid of EIGRP and OSPF and I want to configure RIP and BGP. Okay, well, rather than unconfiguring everything, I will just stop all my routers, go to my snapshot tool, go to my very first snapshot, restore. All right, now start them all up again. And now when I go into R2, we should see, let me make this a little bit larger for you. So now because I went to my first snapshot, if I do show IP protocol, I have nothing. But if I do show IP interface brief, I still have my IP addresses. And that is how you use the snapshot tool.